Early in the morning on November 27, 1989, a Boeing with 101 passengers and 6 crew members on board took off from Bogota Airport, heading for Cali. Just 4 minutes after takeoff, a large explosion ripped the plane apart at an altitude of 13,000 feet. Nobody on board Avianca Flight 203 survived that day. During the investigation, it became clear that the tragedy was not caused by a technical failure, but was an act of terrorism conducted by the Medellin Cartel aimed at presidential candidate César Gaviria. This was a shock even for Colombians who were accustomed to hearing about killings. A terrorist attack of this magnitude was something unprecedented. Blame for the attack was placed squarely on the heads of the cartel members, amongst whom was José Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha, the man responsible for the military operations of the cartel. It may be hard to believe, but he was once completely different, capable of doing good for Colombians and striving for the prosperity of his country. So, what in the world could have happened to make a person decide to commit such an atrocity? Rodríguez Gacha was born and raised in Colombia, near the small town of Pacho, in the department of Cundinamarca. Colombia was a poor country, and much of the population lived quiet, modest lives. This was also the case for Gacha's family. His parents were engaged in pig farming and cheese production, but for the most part, the family was also poor. His friends and acquaintances were of the same means. There was nobody to turn to for help, so Gonzalo dropped out of school just after the 3rd grade and began helping his family. As he grew up, Gacha moved to Bogota, where he worked at several different jobs, including a public transport assistant, a coffee picker, a grocery store assistant, and a waiter, where he closely observed truly wealthy people who were well-dressed, smoking expensive cigars, and ordering delicious and expensive dishes. Gacha also wanted to make big money, wear expensive suits, and make everyone around him jealous. When he visited his parents on the weekends, this desire intensified even further, as both his family and the residents of his beloved town were still living out a miserable existence. Gonzalo was too young and too stubborn to put up with this, and his youthful maximalism led him to Gilberto Molina, a man who was engaged in the search and extraction of emeralds. Molina was not one to refuse the offer of employment, so he took the young boy on board. The emerald mines of Colombia were, and still are, considered one of the richest in the world, and, given Molina's vast experience, things went uphill quickly. Gacha spent many years working different jobs, but in terms of income, this gig beat them all, including being a waiter. In the 1960s, a series of vendettas and disputes led to the so-called First Green War over control of the emerald mines. To strengthen his influence and power, Gilberto Molina enlisted the support of another Emerald King of Colombia, Victor Carranza. This was a great duo, but there was one key difference. Carranza had armed guards and Molina did not. In order not only to survive, but also to win the Green War, Molina needed people who were ready to kill. His choice fell on Rodríguez Gacha, a loyal, responsible employee with whom the Emerald Tycoon had an excellent and trusting relationship. But was he ready to kill? Gonzalo was no gentle, timid kid. After all, he grew up in harsh conditions, poverty, and understood that to get to the top, someone like him sometimes needed to go the extra mile. Undoubtedly, this was his big break, and he took full advantage of it. Becoming a hitman for Molina, Gacha helped him strengthen his position in the emerald business and eventually rose to head of the security service. After a while, Molina and Victor Carranza took the young lad in on the business, increasing Rodríguez Gacha's income many times over. He had to kill, but this helped him achieve what he always wanted: respect and a lot of money. But Gacha was too enterprising to stop there. He longed for even greater success, and his choice fell on the drug trade, a business that, in his opinion, could bring in a lot more money and power. To start, Gonzalo decided to contact Veronica Rivera de Vargas, a pioneering drug trafficker known as the Queen of Cocaine. Gacha knew about her connections, and, after completing several assignments, she introduced him to numerous people, the most important of which were Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, a Mexican drug dealer, and Pablo Escobar, the man who changed Rodríguez Gacha's life forever. Escobar set out on the criminal path early in his life when he was still only a teenager. He stole tombstones from the cemetery, erased the inscriptions, and resold the slabs for a profit. As an adult, Pablo became involved in smuggling, car theft, kidnapping, and, when necessary, murder. But comrades and enemies claimed that Escobar understood everything on the fly and had amazing business acumen. Outwardly, he seemed soft, modest, polite, and very proper. Escobar and Gacha both wanted the same thing: money, power, and respect. They also both had a passion for Colombia and wanted to help the local people improve their lives. On top of that, they were even similar in tone of voice and manner of speaking. Gacha made decent money from emeralds, but seeing the determination and intelligence of his friend, decided to devote himself entirely to the drug trade. They soon gained influential allies in the Ochoa brothers, who came from a respected ranching and horse-riding family, and Carlos Lehder, a fan of Hitler and John Lennon, who spoke excellent English and had good connections in America. In 1976, they created the most famous drug trafficking team in the world, the Medellin Cartel. Before the creation of the cartel, Colombians bought cocoa leaves from Bolivia and Peru, processed them into powder at home, and shipped the resulting product north. However, by 1976, they decided to do away with intermediaries and sell cocaine themselves. By the end of the 70s, American tastes had changed. Marijuana gave way to cocaine, and increased demand caused a sharp spike in prices. In Miami, 1 kilo, 2.2 pounds of cocaine cost $51,000. The river of cocaine was constantly flowing and growing in volume as more and more of it was imported. The Florida Peninsula, with more than 12,000 kilometers of coastline, became a paradise for smugglers. At first, drugs were transported by hand, hidden in the secret compartments of suitcases, secret pockets, and shoes. This proved to be too cumbersome and did not yield the large enough profits that drug traffickers were counting on. Everything changed with the arrival of Lehder, who proposed a much more attractive alternative by transporting cocaine on small planes. Together with his partner George Young, who not only gave him the idea, but also introduced him to major drug distributors in America, they began transporting hundreds of pounds of cocaine, and later tons. By the end of the 70s, Carlos Lehder acquired land on the island of Norman's Cay, which was only 210 miles from Florida, which helped increase profits many times over, while also making drug transportation much easier and more convenient. From a handful of amateur smugglers, an international corporation was born that began to earn billions of dollars. Customs officials estimate that $3.2 billion unaccounted dollars moved through South Florida in 1981. Some people were arrested, but they were mostly small fish. The cocaine kings were holed up in Medellin in complete safety. At the dawn of the cocaine wars, conflicts between cocaine barons and representatives of justice were resolved privately. The police were bribed, and in case of arrest, so was the judge who presided over the case. To close the case, a major drug dealer would lay out a tidy sum of pesos, equal to 30,000 American dollars. Later, the rates grew to 50,000. If the judge did not take the bribes, the smugglers tried to intimidate him, or paid court clerks and stole the folder with the documents. If nothing helped, the judge was simply killed. Rodriguez Gacha's fortune grew rapidly and reached levels he had never even dreamed of before. But he, like other partners, was not going to stop there and constantly tried to expand his business. Thanks to Gacha, new routes were opened through Mexico into the United States, most notably Los Angeles, California, Houston, and Texas. Trips to Mexico greatly influenced Gonzalo, and he grew to adore Mexican culture so much that he began to show his love for it everywhere. He listened to Mexican mariachi, began to wear a sombrero almost without taking it off, and had a large collection of them, decorated his houses in purely Mexican style, and even gave his newly acquired estates Mexican names such as Cuernavaca, Chihuahua, Sonora, and Mazatlan. He was a Colombian with the heart of a Mexican, and for his love of everything Mexican, the drug lord received the rather descriptive nickname El Mexicano. Of course, rumors about wealthy drug traffickers quickly spread throughout Colombia, but no one wanted to challenge them, knowing about their connections, wealth, and armed guards, which were becoming more and more numerous. However, hopeless daredevils could still be found. One day, partisans from M19 decided to kidnap the sister of the Ochoa brothers, demanding a ransom. Oh, how badly did they miscalculate the arena. A friend in need is a friend indeed, and the kidnapping of Martha Ochoa truly was another step towards bringing partners of the Medellin Cartel closer together. The drug lords were not going to pay the ransom, and, having found out where the partisans were hiding, carried out an absolute massacre. The surviving leaders of M19, whom the cartel did not manage to find, were so terrified that they returned Martha just 20 hours after the abduction safe and sound. In addition, the partisans joined forces with the Medellin Cartel to protect themselves from certain death. Their knowledge of warfare and guerrilla fighting would prove useful time and time again to the drug barons of the Medellin Cartel. The operation to rescue Martha Ochoa was carried out impeccably, and Rodriguez Gacha, who had considerable experience in such endeavors and played a huge role in its success, allocating $500,000 for the formation of an armed detachment. Even though he used to kill under the leadership of the Emerald Tycoon Gilberto Molina, it was perhaps after the kidnapping of Martha Ochoa that the drug lord showed a strong interest in military enterprises. He now had the resources, so Gonzalo became the main financier, organizer, and leader of the military wing of the Medellin Cartel. Strong, proud, and with a strong personality, Gacha was, as people described him, polite to those around him and merciless to those who were against him. He was very fond of wearing tennis shoes and short-sleeved shirts and always wore a sombrero. Having earned millions of dollars from the drug business, El Mexicano began to help ordinary people and bring Pacho, the place where he spent his childhood and still held very close to his heart, from its knees. Gacha began building schools, hospitals, residential buildings, hotels, and clubs, installed electric lights in areas of the city where there weren't any, installed running water, bought buses, and set up public transport. He did not shy away from sharing his wealth with people and paid his employees, of whom he had several thousand, wages that were many times higher than what they usually received for their work. Sometimes the pay increase was as high as 300%. El Mexicano would award his best workers with visas or starting capital for a move to start a better life in the States, if they so desired. At Pacho, Gonzalo loved to throw parties for the common people, with plenty of free food and drink. And on Christmas, he always gave people clothes and other necessities of life. Folks like Gacha were frequently called magicos, as they often walked around with a black suitcase in their hand and seemed to make money out of practically thin air. One day, a homeowner heard a knock on his door. Opening it, he saw a young man about 25 years old standing by his entryway, hung with gold and diamonds. The guest politely inquired whether it was possible to buy the house. Not wanting to sell, and not taking the fellow seriously, the owner jokingly replied that he would ask for no less than $1 million. The guest immediately gave him the suitcase and asked the owner to count it. Such transactions were commonplace, and the payment was always much higher than the real cost of the item being purchased. There were cases when Gonzalo personally distributed money to passers-by and gave gifts to children, like guns that shot corks. When Popayan, a city in western Colombia, was hit by a devastating earthquake, killing 267 people, Gacha provided enormous social and financial assistance to both the affected people and the site of the tragedy. El Mexicano tried to create the impression of an honest, noble, and pleasant gentleman who wouldn't hurt a fly, and many considered him as such. Gacha allocated millions of drug dollars to community improvement projects, provided jobs to numerous people, and boosted the local economy. His friend Pablo Escobar, with whom El Mexicano had a strong, respectful relationship, did approximately the same thing in Medellin. While helping others, Rodriguez Gacha did not forget about himself. Having become rich, El Mexicano began to fanatically buy up land, placing special emphasis on the Middle Magdalena region in the valley, bordering the departments of Antioquia, Boyacá, and Santander, becoming the largest landowners in the country. He also actively bought farms, apartments, houses, commercial establishments, and other real estate, the amount of which over time exceeded 100 and was valued at more than $40 billion. Like all his drug lord partners, Gacha kept money in numerous banks around the world, but also liked to convert it into tangible materials, buying gold bars, diamonds, gold toilets, gold tableware, crystal porcelain, Persian tapestries, Italian marble, silk, and countless other luxurious items. Eyewitnesses who managed to visit the houses owned by Gacha said that silver and gold were practically everywhere. Gyms, swimming pools with jacuzzis, Turkish baths and saunas, billiards, football fields, ponds with swimming geese, and rare species of trees. Such wealth was commonplace in his luxurious villas. But besides all the above, Gacha also passionately loved three things: horses, football, and women. El Mexicano was always surrounded by elegant women who were crazy about him. Steadfast, respected, and wealthy, Rodriguez Gacha had 3 wives, the last of whom was Gladys Alvarez. It's no wonder that having so much attention from the ladies, the drug lord loved to have side flings. It is from one of these extramarital affairs that Gacha's beloved son Freddy was born. Officially, it is believed that El Mexicano had 3 children, but according to rumors, the actual number is much higher. In 1982, Gacha became the largest shareholder of the Colombian football club Millonarios. He paid off all the club's debts and actively dumped money into it, buying up the best players and improving the infrastructure. Interestingly, he organized his first match as a shareholder on one of his farms, where another famous team from Bogotá, Santa Fe, played against his Millonarios. Sometimes his club's football players played against his bodyguards and hitmen. El Mexicano was obsessed with his team, constantly discussing the games, and was very happy when the Millonarios were beating América de Cali, a Colombian team owned by business rivals, the Khali Cartel. Gacha set the highest expectations for his team. He wanted them to win the Colombian Championship and the Copa Libertadores. As a result, in 1987 and 1988, Millonarios became national champions, making the then half-crazed El Mexicano extremely ecstatic. Gonzalo loved horses since childhood. He was always amazed by these proud, majestic animals. Having become rich, Gacha became seriously interested in horses, leading him to keep more than 200 horses on his farms. Of course, his favorite was the majestic horse named Tupac Amaru. The stallion, which was conservatively worth $1 million, wasn't all that good to begin with. In his early years, Tupac, who had an elite pedigree, ran, as his trainers claimed, like a cow, and no one would offer a peso for him. But thanks to discipline and skill, in a few months, the trainers turned him into an ideal horse, which Gacha fell in love with, prompting him to pay a huge sum for it, adding, "This is not a horse, this is a jewel." He built an expensive, separate stable for Tupac that included automatic waterers, and the horse was looked after by the best grooms in the country. And only Gacha and one of the best riders in the country named Victor were allowed to ride him. Life was great, not only for Rodriguez Gacha, but also for his partners. Carlos Lehder, having seen how Gacha and Pablo Escobar helped the ordinary citizens in their cities, also decided to help his hometown of Armenia. Escobar went much further and decided to try to fulfill his old dream of becoming the president of Colombia in the Colombian Congress. This proved to be a massive mistake that led to multiple problems. However, there were some problems that affected Gacha personally. In 1984, following a tip from DEA agents, Colombian police destroyed the largest cocaine lab belonging to El Mexicano. The laboratory was called Tranquilandia. It wasn't an informant that brought the police to a mysterious location in the jungle, but a huge shipment of ether, a very important substance used in the production of cocaine. Ether from the States went straight to Colombia, where it was supposed to be used for its intended purpose. Similar operations were carried out all the time, but this shipment was bugged with radio signaling devices, using which the DEA agents tracked the final point of the cargo route in the Colombian jungle. The DEA passed the information to the Colombian police, who immediately organized a raid into the jungle where the ether was brought. As the police moved deeper into the camp, they realized that they didn't simply find the main lab, but rather a full-scale factory that employed and clothed over 100 workers and ran a full cycle of cocaine production. The factory had generators, showers, washing and drying machines, an independent water and power supply system, dormitories for workers, and huge reserves of raw materials. And then they found the cocaine. There were around 100 large plastic garbage bags, open and filled to the brim with a semi-liquid, viscous mass of cocaine hydrochloride, with a sickly, sweet cloud of ethereal fumes hanging over them. A couple of days later, there was a knock on the door of a relative of Jaime Ramirez, the head of the National Police Department Against Drugs. The relative, himself a former policeman, didn't allow strangers in the house, instead opting to listen to them right on the street. They behaved politely and spoke quietly. Pablo Escobar asked the relative to tell his brother that $400,000 are waiting for him if he stops. They offered to put the money in any bank of choice, be it in Panama, in the States, or wherever else he wanted. Ramirez, upon learning the news, refused with indignation. After carefully studying the evidence gathered in Tranquilandia, it was decided to burn everything. In just half a month, 13.8 metric tons of cocaine went up in smoke, along with 19 laboratories and camps, 7 airplanes, and 11,800 drums of ether and other chemicals. Colombian authorities estimate that in 2 years, these laboratories brought the cocaine tycoons $12 billion in net income. The destroyed camps, along with the burned cocaine, were worth 10 times less. During the investigation, it was revealed that the laboratory belonged to José Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha. The destruction of the cocaine factory became the most successful law enforcement operation against the drug lords to date. A defeat of this magnitude greatly infuriated the members of the Medellin Cartel, forcing them to unsheathe their metaphorical daggers. It was on, and the cartel's answer came immediately. In January of 1984, Escobar left the political arena in disgrace with the statement, "Politicians are not interested in the opinion of the people and their aspirations." Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla played a major role in expelling the drug lord from Congress, convicting Escobar of numerous sins. This was a heavy hit on Escobar's ambitions, who believed that by taking a political seat, he could greatly help both himself and his country. But Escobar, like Gacha, was a drug lord, and if the ordinary people who they helped didn't care, the politicians certainly did. Lara Bonilla was brave and at the same time reckless, believing that the drug lords would not be able to go against the Minister of Justice. But apparently, he didn't fully understand who he was dealing with. The destruction of Tranquilandia, the expulsion of Escobar from Congress, and on top of that, the unexpected attacks from FARC guerrillas who had previously worked with drug lords forced Gacha and Escobar to act. Pablo's next move proved to be the flashiest one. On April 30th, at 7 in the evening, 2 killers on a motorbike, hung with grenades, and a MAC-10 at the ready merged with the flow of cars, looking for the white Mercedes-Benz that carried Lara Bonilla. Finally, the motorcycle driver crashed into the Mercedes at full speed, slightly denting its right rear fender. Grabbing the MAC-10, the killer regained his bearings and aimed the submachine gun at the figure dimly visible in the back seat and held down the trigger, releasing the entire clip in 2 seconds. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was dead. For the drug barons, this mistake, which didn't at all seem like a mistake at the time, was fatal. The Colombian ministers were stunned. Mainly, however, the cartel disgraced its people and deeply insulted the president. For the first time in Colombian history, a cabinet minister was assassinated. The government quickly declared a state of siege in the country, flooded the streets with police, and, worst of all for the drug traffickers, signed an extradition treaty. Now, if the cocaine heavyweights were caught, they would serve their sentences in an American prison. The murder of Rodrigo Lara Bonilla forced the Medellin Cartel on the run for the first time in its existence. By killing the Minister of Justice, the drug bosses crossed the line. Most of the leaders decided to lay low in neighboring Panama while the heat died down. This was the correct play for many reasons. Firstly, the flight from Medellin to Panama took less than an hour, and the traffickers knew the city well. For several years in a row, they met in Panama and laundered their income in Panamanian banks. But most importantly, the Medellin Cartel in Panama had a patron, General Manuel Antonio Noriega, commander of the Panama Defense Forces and the most powerful man in the country. Some drug traffickers have known the general personally since 1982, when Gacha bribed Noriega to allow the cartel to use Panama as a transit point. Under the auspices of Noriega, the cartel played a double, long-range game to restore its former power. On the other hand, The drug lords were not averse to making peace with the Colombian government in hopes that the past would be forgotten and all their sins forgiven. They even sent a letter to the president asking him to consider the possibility of their reunification with the Colombian society. They never got a reply. While they were rebuilding their business in Panama and Nicaragua, their business in Colombia was gradually collapsing. The same Jaime Ramirez, under whose leadership Tranquilandia was smashed to smithereens, continually struck cocaine laboratories, destroying as many as 84 cocaine labs in 7 months. He wasn't about to get any of the drug barons themselves, except for Carlos Lehder, who was still hiding in Colombia, but he miraculously managed to continuously evade the police. Panama was not a comfortable location for the drug lords, and it was difficult to manage their business from afar. So, after some time of recharging their batteries and thinking everything through, Gacha and Escobar decided to return to Colombia. They wanted to negotiate with the government, and despite the state of siege in the country, they had a chance of getting their way. Colombians were tired of the state of their country, and 48% of the population supported possible negotiations with the drug barons. While the government was dragging its feet, by the fall of 1984, the Medellin Cartel had partially regained its former power and might. The flow of cocaine never dried up, and, on the contrary, only increased. In just 2 weeks, in January of 1985, the police and federal DEA agents seized 2,250 kilograms of cocaine in Florida, more than in the first 3 months of 1984, and more than in all of 1981. Meanwhile, the Colombian government did not budge and hoped that the Colombian army, with the support of the Americans, would be able to put pressure on the cartel until they made another drastic miscalculation. The police were given sweeping powers, and within a year, hundreds of suspects were thrown into prison. But any attempts to capture Rodriguez Gacha and Pablo Escobar were repeatedly thwarted. Several times, squadrons of helicopters swooped down on their hideouts moments after the drug lords fled, leaving behind brewed coffee, still-burning cigarettes, and tables piled high with warm food. The security forces were baffled as informants of the cartel, who were practically ubiquitous in the police force, constantly informed their overlords on any ongoing business. Meanwhile, Gacha managed not only to hide from the police, but also to fight with FARC guerrillas. Until 1983, some guerrilla groups still provided surveillance and protection for drug lords' plantations and laboratories. But by 1983, they had become their worst enemies after destroying several labs, killing people who worked there, and stealing more than 10 tons of cocaine paste and money. The militant El Mexicano immediately went on the offensive, deciding to strike at the guerrillas through the Unión Patriótica, a political party founded by the guerrillas. As a result, Gonzalo went completely off the rails, and in 2 years, with the help of hitmen, killed off no fewer than 471 members of the party, and in 1987 put an end to it for good by killing an influential advisor to the party and a man who was running for president. His name was Jaime Padro Leal. However, the war with the FARC did not bring Gacha and Escobar any closer to their main goals: negotiations with the government for the abolition of the extradition treaty and a pardon. At some point, tired of the constant attacks by Colombian police and the passivity of the government, the leaders of Medellin Cartel decided that they could not do without serious military actions, in which Gacha was an expert. By 1986, the cartel entered into an open conflict with the government and moved from threats to the methodical destruction of any Colombian department and any organization that did not satisfy the drug traffickers' demands or stood in their way. The cartel could kill anyone with impunity. The killers were seldom prosecuted. A nightmare was unleashed on Colombia. The first high-profile event was the capture of the Palace of Justice. On the morning of November 1985, a covered truck stopped near the Supreme Court on the main Capitol Square, and approximately 35 partisans armed with rifles, machine guns, and pistols jumped out. They belonged to M19, the same guerrillas who had kidnapped Marta Ochoa 4 years earlier and were now working for the cartel. In a few minutes, they captured the building and the 250 hostages that were inside it. For over a day, the guerrillas held the Palace of Justice workers hostage without making any clear demands, and at the same time started a fire in the rooms where evidence against the Colombian drug lords was kept. When the Colombian army liberated the Palace of Justice from the guerrillas, it was estimated that at least 95 people had died, including 12 judges. The attack was organized and sponsored by Medellin Cartel. Having terrified the judges, the cartel turned to the police, who were still led by the same Jaime Ramirez, who was causing massive headaches for the drug barons. In November of 1986, Ramirez and his family were driving home from their friends. In the middle of the bridge, a red Renault caught up with the Ramirez family Toyota. At first, it seemed like the Renault simply wanted to overtake, but its intentions became clear when the cars lined up side by side. In a blink of an eye, the MAC-10, a favorite tool of the Colombian mercenaries, appeared from the passenger window of the Renault and, twitching, fired a long burst at the Toyota. Jaime Ramirez went limp and fell head first on the steering wheel. He died instantly. The media were also not spared. Guillermo Cana Isasa was the editor-in-chief of the El Espectador newspaper and led the charge against the attack carried out by the cartel. For a long time, he wrote an editorial in which he single-handedly fought for the tightening of the anti-drug trafficking laws. In December of 1986, Cano, as usual, finished work, got in his car, and went home. That evening, however, he didn't notice a motorcycle and two people standing on the side of the road. When the journalist slowed down at one of the turns, the passenger of the motorcycle immediately jumped off and grabbed the MAC-10 out of a large case. The man quickly rushed to Cano's car and pulled the trigger. The journalist died instantly. The country's law enforcement forces were paralyzed, but they were not going to give up. Colombian President Virgilio Barco, like his predecessor, issued a series of decrees imposing a state of siege in the country. During the state of emergency, Barco gave all police officers unlimited powers, and this decision bore fruit. In less than a month, the police arrested several hundred people, seized 200 kilograms of cocaine, destroyed 5 laboratories, and confiscated more than 400 guns. After the horrors of 1986, these relatively modest successes caused a slight euphoria in Colombia. The public saw that it was now at least possible to fight against the criminal elements. To add the cherry to the cake, at the beginning of 1987, Carlos Lehder, one of the cartel leaders, was caught and extradited to the United States, marking the first time a drug lord was sent to an American prison. For Gacha and the other cartel members, it was a sign that despite the large number of high-profile public assassinations they committed, it still wasn't enough. They had to try something else. The boy from Pacho, who dreamed of wealth and a better life for Colombians, had no idea how many enemies he would have. The Khali Cartel would soon be added to that already long list. Men from Khali were more level-headed and less flamboyant than their Medellin counterparts. They saw smuggling as a sophisticated business, quietly reinvesting their profits into legitimate businesses. Up until a certain point, Khali and Medellin cartels, although competitors, conducted their business independently and did not interfere with each other. The first event that exposed the differences between the country's drug cartels was the assassination of Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. Even though Rodrigo Lara Bonilla had become a thorn in the side of the country's drug lords, the Khali cartel believed that killing the politician would only create more problems for the business. And they were right. The murder of the minister turned everything upside down. The second event was the arrest of one of the leaders of the Medellin Cartel, Jorge Ochoa, who was captured by the police while on his way to Cali to negotiate with the cartel. Medellin thought that this was a setup. In addition, Escobar had a personal grudge against Pacho Herrera, one of the leaders of the Khali Cartel, which, coupled with the escalating problems over the sales markets, caused the relations between the organizations to reach a boiling point. The primary event, after which an open war between the cartels began, was an incident near the Meico building, where Escobar temporarily lived with his family. When a 700-kilogram dynamite bomb exploded in front of it, a part of the building collapsed, injuring 10 people and killing 3, also almost causing Escobar's daughter to go deaf in one ear. Although the Khali Cartel claimed that it had nothing to do with the attack, Escobar believed otherwise and launched a full-scale attack. Naturally, he was helped in this by his friend RODRIGUEZ GACHA, who, like Escobar, became incredibly cruel in the wake of all this violence. He even set up a gallows with a hanging hangman's noose on the lawn of one of his ranches and engraved his initials on the bullets with which he loaded his silver pistol. Seeing the difficulty of the present situation, Gacha even surrounded himself with a massive army he created. Between December 1987 and May 1988, El Mexicano hired Israeli-British mercenaries to train teams of assassins at remote training camps in Colombia. The head of military training was Jair Klein, a former lieutenant colonel in the Israeli army. An experienced and assertive military man, Klein turned the poorly trained Colombians into a death squad that worked exclusively for Gacha. These soldiers knew not only how to proficiently handle various weapons, shoot accurately, and reload quickly in the heat of battle, but were also versed in the handling of explosives, which the drug lords would soon take full advantage of. Thus, Gacha became the commander of narco-paramilitarism in Colombia, with an army of over 1,000 people. With danger looming on all sides, this was undoubtedly the right move for El Mexicano. He had no intention of retreating, and with such a powerful and numerous army, Gacha himself became a hunter. Naturally, such an army required a lot of money, but even considering the present situation, with the police destroying the laboratories by the dozen and the drug lord's enemies not allowing him to concentrate on his work, business was still booming. This was confirmed in 1988 by a publication in the eminent Forbes magazine, which included Rodriguez Gacha in its annual list of the world's billionaires. Meanwhile, the already powerful and bloodthirsty Gacha and Escobar over the years have completely transformed into terrorists, ready to do anything. They were tired of being constantly attacked, tired of being driven into a corner. The drug lords decided to tip the scales in their favor in earnest and took drastic measures, guided by the all-or-nothing principle. Colombia transformed from a place of nightmares into hell. On January 18, 1989, Rodriguez Gacha ordered his men to kill 12 judicial officials who were investigating forced disappearances and random killings in which the Medellin Cartel was involved. Posing as guerrillas, Gacha's killers intercepted the Judicial Commission, fraudulently took their revolvers, tied them up, and took them to La Laguna, where they were greeted by 15 armed people. Shots rang out immediately and the hostages were killed. Surprisingly, 3 still managed to escape. They pretended to be dead so they would not be shot at. One survivor said, "Before they checked me, I closed my eyes, opened my mouth, stuck out my tongue, and twisted it. I remained motionless, as if dead." The second striking event occurred in August, when Luis Carlos Galan, who was planning to run for the presidency of Colombia, was killed. Galan was the man who, if won, could pose a serious threat to drug traffickers, and his chances of winning were high. On August 18, 1989, Galan, protected by 18 armed bodyguards, was killed as he took the stage to give a speech to 10,000 people in Soacha. At least 10 people were injured as a result of the shelling. Despite many influential politicians and police officers being killed in 1989, it was after the death of Galan that Colombians admitted that they were losing their war on drugs. At the end of November, a devastating tragedy struck Colombia, the explosion of Avianca Flight 203. Just a day before the attack, one of the drug lord's confidants arrived in Bogotá to buy 2 tickets for Flight 203. He registered himself under an alias, using the same name as the owner of the company, and the second person was registered as a famous smuggler whom Escobar once called his mentor. Oddly enough, the airport staff were not alarmed. So the next day, the holders of these tickets requested seats located next to the gas tanks on the right wing of the aircraft. In the waiting room, the person who bought the tickets handed the suitcase to the second passenger and left a few minutes before takeoff. When the passenger sat down inside the plane, he took out the suitcase, waited a few minutes for the plane to take off, and, opening the suitcase, pressed the record button on the recorder. The voice recorder lying inside the suitcase was intended for other purposes. However, it was stuffed with explosives. The Boeing exploded about 4 kilometers above the ground, and the passenger, who did not even know that he was carrying a bomb in his suitcase, died immediately and took the lives of 106 other people. The target of this terrorist attack was the future president of Colombia, Cesar Gaviria, who ardently supported extradition, which was objectionable for the cocaine kings. but Gaviria, on the instructions of his security, who believed that it was more convenient and safer to fly on charter flights, did not board the plane and remained alive. Colombians were tired of the tragedies and horror that were happening all around them, but this was not enough for the drug barons. They expected the government to completely capitulate and decided to finish them off with a new terrorist attack. A week before the next explosion, Gacha contacted an explosives dealer in Ecuador who supplied the Medellin Cartel with dynamite. 500 kilograms of dynamite were installed on a bus, which was parked near the building of the Administrative Department of Security, DAS. At 7:33 a.m., a massive explosion shook the air in the city, creating a crater 13 meters across and 4 meters deep. The explosion was directed against General Miguel Maza Marquez, who was actively putting a spoke in the cartel's wheels. The general himself wasn't injured. However, numerous other innocent people suffered. 63 lost their lives and almost 600 were injured. It seemed that the drug barons won after all, but at what cost? Gacha, who once handed out cash in poor neighborhoods, donated wads of money to churches, donated blankets to bedridden pensioners, and in every way expressed love for ordinary Colombians, now, together with Escobar, massacred these same people. Or did he consider only those who live in Pacho to be people? Completely distraught, El Mexicano also decided to eliminate his longtime mentors, thanks to whom he escaped from poverty. Gilberto Molina and Victor Carranza, the Emerald Kings, almost the only ones with whom the drug lord was still on good terms, soon experienced all the cruelty of their former partner when they refused him a new partnership. During a housewarming party hosted by Gilberto Molina, a group of approximately 25 uniformed men stormed his luxury ranch and killed 18 people, including Molina, leaving no survivors. Victor Carranza also suffered from El Mexicano's actions. Even though there were no attempts on his life, Gacha's men bombed his office and killed his nephew. The drug lord also killed Veronica Rivera, the same lady who introduced Gacha to Escobar. It seemed that El Mexicano was so carried away by the massacres that he killed everyone he saw and simply could not stop. He felt invincible despite simultaneously fighting with the Colombian government, the FARC guerrillas, the American DEA, the Khali Cartel, and other smugglers. At the same time, having essentially only Escobar and, to a lesser extent, the Ochoa brothers as his comrades, he was still untouchable. It was impossible to get to him by conventional means. It required cunning and extraordinary maneuvers, something the bosses of the Khali always excelled at. After 12 court officials were shot on the orders of Gacha, Khali sent one of their own men who was nicknamed El Navigante to El Mexicano. He was supposed to help catch either Gacha or his friend Escobar, and if successful, he would receive a $1 million reward. According to the DEA, Rodriguez Gacha was the richest and most dangerous member of the Medellin Cartel. He was responsible for most of the major military operations carried out by the drug cartel. This was also confirmed by the future president of Colombia, Cesar Gaviria, who considered Gacha much more bloodthirsty than Escobar, calling him a psychopath who did not care about people's lives, citing as an example his actions in Bogotá, where, according to the president, Gacha threw bodies out of an airplane. The psychopath had too many enemies, their numbers swelling almost daily, and it was probably only a matter of time before he would get caught. In one of the raids, the Colombian police managed to get hold of Gacha's son, Freddy Rodriguez, and charged him with carrying a weapon. The violation was minor, but the police were in no hurry to let Freddy go. They were waiting for a move from Gacha, but nothing happened, and his son had to be released. There's a theory that it was Freddy himself who led the police to El Mexicano, as after he was released from the precinct, surveillance started on him, but this is false. A huge amount of resources was spent on the search of the drug lords from Medellin, and a key role in the capture of El Mexicano was played by a man named Jorge Velázquez, nicknamed El Navigante. Velázquez was a Cali man who quickly became a prominent hitman in Gacha's assassination squad. El Navigante, having worked for El Mexicano for only 10 months, managed to earn the respect and trust of the drug lord. This was exactly what Velázquez needed. After receiving the signal to act from his Khali cartel overlords, Navigante quietly met with the police and revealed Gacha's location. He was in Cartagena de Indias, protected by 25 bodyguards. The next day, 30 people from the elite military unit went to the location where the drug lord was supposed to be, but he wasn't there. Rodríguez Gacha, thanks to his informers, realized at the last moment that the police were pursuing him, and quickly, together with his son and 5 bodyguards, among whom was El Navigante, boarded a motorboat, which headed to a farm located between Tolú and Coveñas. However, the next day, Jorge Velázquez got in touch with the police and once again revealed Gacha's new location. Immediately, 2 artillery helicopters and Marines were dispatched to the coordinates, cutting off the retreat should Gacha attempt to run away by boat once again. Arriving at the scene, they used loudspeakers and sirens to demand Rodríguez Gacha to surrender, but there was no response. At some point, the police believed that the information provided by El Navigante was false. There was no movement in the house or outside of it. The only people in sight were the farm workers and a red Chevrolet truck. As a result, it was decided to split up to check the area, and one of the helicopters flew towards Tolú and the other towards Coveñas. However, as one of the helicopters flew towards Tolú, it passed from the farm but noticed that the red truck was no longer there. This information was relayed to the second helicopter, and the search for the car began. Gacha was here. Less than 2 kilometers from Tolú, the truck was intercepted. The car stopped, and Freddy and 4 bodyguards got out and opened fire on the helicopter. The helicopter immediately responded with machine gun fire and killed 2 bodyguards. As Freddy and 2 guards hid behind the trees, trying to fight off the airborne police, one of the helicopters landed and disembarked several soldiers. These soldiers quickly dealt with the remaining bodyguards, killing everyone except Gacha's son. El Mexicano himself continued his escape, now alone with his driver in the red Chevrolet, without the backup of his loyal goons or his son. It was impossible to get away. A second helicopter was hot on their heels. Seeing an ambush on the road ahead, the truck abruptly stopped and Gacha jumped out. In a panic, he rushed to a banana plantation located on the side of the road. At some point, the helicopter lost sight of him. The helicopter then began firing in an attempt to locate the fugitives. El Mexicano, running as fast as he could in an unknown direction, did not notice the wire fence ahead, becoming entangled and seriously injuring his head. In desperation, Gacha began to fire the machine gun he was carrying at the helicopter, thereby giving himself away. In response, the police fired at him from a helicopter-mounted machine gun, wounding him in one leg and causing him to fall. The next shot that hit Gacha in the face was fatal. The 7.62 caliber bullet hit him in the head so hard that he was practically disfigured. The epilogue was the death of the last of Rodríguez Gacha's men a few minutes later. The search for one of the most dangerous criminals in Colombian history was now over. Gacha died on December 15, 1989. He was 42 years old. For law enforcement, the death of one of the country's 2 most wanted men was a monumental success. Before this operation, everyone believed, not without reason, that Colombia was losing to the cartel in all respects. But now, everything changed. The myth about the invulnerability of the drug lords had been dispelled. Congratulations immediately poured in on the president and his administration. Medellin Cartel had lost its armed wing, and now only Escobar remained a threat. After Gacha's death, there was a lot of talk about how he died. For example, one of the popular versions was that the drug lord blew himself up with a grenade. Some theorized that Gacha did not die at all and was later seen at his own birthday party. There was also a theory that El Mexicano paid the US government $60 million to fake his death, escape persecution, and start a new life in Ecuador. El Navigante, a trader living in Florida and working as a mechanic, was not killed by a traitor, as was shown in the Narcos series. In a 2009 interview, he said that he saw Gacha holding something in his hand and committing suicide. The soldier who was flying in the helicopter with El Navigante asked him to lie that Gacha was killed by him. El Navigante did just that. The story of Gacha is also the story of Escobar, given that they were partners and friends, and their lives were closely intertwined. Many movies, videos, and TV series have been made about Pablo Escobar, but Gacha, who played an equally significant role in the Medellin Cartel, fell into the background in the public's imagination, despite being much more aggressive and dangerous. His death marked the beginning of the end for Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel. Rodriguez Gacha started his journey penniless, serving food to the rich, and ended up with billions of dollars and an entire army hunting him. So what happened to all this wealth anyway? It looks like it was used to fill many wallets. Indeed, despite all his brutal murders, and given the current level of unemployment in the country, many remember him with warmth, as once upon a time, Gacha truly did do a lot of good things for the ordinary citizens. It seems they only remember his best side, which cannot outweigh all the evil and cruel crimes he had committed. El Mexicano may have been a nice guy, but he was not a good person. A priori, someone responsible for the murders of more than 1,000 people cannot be good, but he certainly left a huge mark on history.